And when King Louis of France asked Pascal this question, the philosopher Pascal, King Louis said, "Give me one proof of the existence of God." And Pascal said, "Your Majesty, the Jews." And that, I think, is a wonderful answer. It's the one proof we have that there is a God. Study the history of the Jews and try and explain any of it without God, and you've got a job on hand. You can't. It's a proof of God, and they are a demonstration to the world. I must rush on. Let's go on to the mosaic. My, that clock is rushing faster than it did last time. The mosaic. This was made at Mount Sinai 430 years after Abraham. And this covenant concerned the occupation of the land, whereas the Abrahamic gave them the ownership of the land forever. That doesn't mean that there weren't conditions of occupying it. And God gave 613 laws covering their family life, their marriages, their deaths, their clothes, their food, their sewage disposal. Bylaws galore. 613 laws. 10 big ones we know as the 10 Commandments, but 603 others covering every aspect of their life. This is how you're to live a holy, healthy, happy life. And if you live this way, I will bless the land. It will be fertile. I will bless your bodies. There'll be no disease among you. There'll be no poverty among you. Wonderful covenant, but the downside is you don't live my way, and I curse you. I will send pestilence, drought, disease on your crops, locusts to eat up the crops. I'll send earthquakes. I'll send invaders to raid your country. And if that still doesn't work, if you still go on the wrong way, I'll let them come in and occupy the country. And finally, if you still refuse to live my way, you leave the country. And I send you into exile. And all that happened. Read your Old Testament. It's the story of a people who stubbornly refused to live God's way. They were stiff-necked, stubborn. It's a tragic story. It took them 1,000 years to get all the promised land and only 500 to lose it all. Now, this was the Mosaic covenant, which was purely national and was a covenant of security in the land, that God would provide for them and protect them, and that they could occupy the land provided they kept his laws. The proviso was, if you obey, you'll be blessed. You'll enjoy health, prosperity, all that you need. If you disobey the laws, you're cursed. And disasters, occupation, and ultimately exile will result. Now, God keeps his promises, whether to bless or to curse, right up to today. And you know, if you read Deuteronomy 28, the list of curses that God would bring when they didn't live his way, you're reading the story of the Holocaust just 50 years ago, 60 years ago. It's an incredible account of what happened in Nazi Germany, written down 3,000 and more years ago. And God kept his promise to them. That's quite a severe thing to say, because the one thing that Jews debate is, where was God in the Holocaust? And I've only heard one Jew who ever dared to say that God was cursing his people. And that was a man who's spoken in this building called Art Katz. And he's the only Jew I've met who was prepared to admit that God was keeping his promise in the Holocaust. But you don't play games with God. We're not playing with God. God is serious. He means what he says. And he's promised blessing and curse, not just to the Jews, but to the whole human race. And one day the Lord Jesus will divide the nations like a shepherd divides the sheep and the goats. And he will say to those on one hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, enter the kingdom. Inherit the kingdom." And to the others he will say, "Depart from me, you cursed." Jesus himself will bless and curse the whole world. Well, the Mosaic was a temporary covenant. It was really only intended until the Messiah came. So all those laws of Moses were temporary. That's a very important point to make. And it was so that they would be this demonstration of how blessed and how cursed a nation could be if it either lived God's way or lived its own way. The national anthem of living our own way is, "I did it my way." That's the essence of sin. And that's what God can't cope with. He gave us life. He told us how to live it, how to be healthy, happy, how to be his heirs. And most of us don't even want to know. The Davidic, let me just finally say a few words about the covenant he made with King David. This time it was a covenant about succession. The kingdom of Israel under David reached its peak, its greatest borders. Most, if not all, of the promised land was now theirs. They had peace. The Philistines were defeated. Other nations had been drawn into the kingdom of David. It was now an empire. And still they looked back to the days of King David as the best of their history. I wear 2 rings here. You can come and look at them afterwards if you wish. They both have the name David, David in Hebrew, on them. And this was given to me on our 25th wedding anniversary by my wife. And I watched a little Jew in Jerusalem make it. He's engraved the walls of Jerusalem on it and my name on the top. My wife gave me this to remind me to be a watchman on the wall. And this one, they were digging the foundations of a new block of apartments in London. And they found they were digging in an old Jewish cemetery. They found bones, and they found this ring with the name David on it, David, and they gave it to me. I'm very grateful to that. I don't know who it belonged to. It belonged to a Jew called David. David, King David, when they were at the peak of their powers. And God made a covenant with David. And on his deathbed, if you read the last words of David, he thanked God for the covenant that God made with him. And the covenant was a mixture of national and international. On the national side, God promised successors who would sit on his throne if they kept the commandments of God. But there was another part to the promise, that one day there would be a son of David that would sit on David's throne forever, and would not only be king of the Jews, but king of the whole world, of all the nations. That's the Davidic covenant. What a covenant. And we know who that son was. It was the Messiah through whom the new covenant would be established, the anointed one. Anointed in Hebrew is Messiah, from which we get Messiah. And in Greek, it's Christos, from which we get Christ. Christ isn't Jesus' surname. It means Messiah. I wish we would use it instead of Christ. It would remind us that he's Jewish and that he's fulfilling the Jewish covenants. Instead of saying the Lord Jesus Christ, say the Lord Jesus Messiah. and were really pointing to its meaning.